we knew that she was going to be in Texas. So I said, open invitation.
Right. You said you can come whenever you want.
Anytime.
We need to wisen up to the fact that it's a brand new era in political campaigning, and the old rules no longer apply. The old ways of campaigning and getting your message out aren't really as effective. And so when we're thinking about candidates, we have to consider whether they're comfortable making a case for themselves in a less formal format. And Joe Rogan's podcast is...
Rogan didn't just stir the pot. He shattered the political playbook when he revealed on his podcast that Vice President Kamala Harris had simply denied a request to appear on his show during the critical stretch of the 2024 campaign. While candidates battled for airtime like it was oxygen, Harris seemed to treat Rogan's studio as if it were a crime scene, with no intention of being involved. Enter Anna Kasparian, who wields criticism like a kerosene-soaked razor. She slammed Harris's media strategy, calling it not only cowardly, but also out of touch with current political realities. Today, we'll examine Rogan's shocking revelation, Kasparian's razor-sharp reply, and the larger question that hovers over everything. Can a candidate survive in the era of viral videos, scathing memes, and podcast warfare if they can't handle 2 hours of unscripted talk?
Going to be in Texas. So I said, open invitation.
Right. You said you can come whenever you want.
Anytime. You pick a time, I will be here.
According to Joe Rogan, the topic of marijuana was an absolute no-go for the Harris campaign. He says it was one of the topics they told him was off limits to come on his podcast. But why? Well, during the election cycle, it wasn't until the end of September that Kamala Harris came out in support of legalizing marijuana on a federal level. And as Rogan said, she may have been hesitant to talk about it because of her prosecutorial record. And this was something that progressives were actually very critical about when it came to Kamala Harris during the Democratic primary in 2020.
Kamala Harris didn't just deny an interview. She wasted a terrific opportunity, transforming it into a textbook example of a political blunder. Joe Rogan's podcast isn't just influential, it's a cultural behemoth with millions of listeners who value honesty over glamour. Instead of accepting the challenge, Harris allegedly tried to reshape the appearance into a controlled PR piece. 1 hour. Maximum, only softball questions, and complete editorial control. That's not how it works. This isn't a daytime talk show. The Joe Rogan Experience demands honesty, not stage-managed spin. To make matters worse, she reportedly evaded questions on marijuana policy, an issue that has haunted her since her days. As a tough prosecutor, when she imprisoned hundreds for marijuana offenses, while later joking about getting high. That's not a good look. This was her chance to face it, own it, and maybe even grow from it. Instead, she vanished, appearing less like a leader and more like a political effigy designed to dodge any trace of real accountability.
Francisco District Attorney from 2004 to 2011, Harris oversaw over 1,900 convictions for cannabis violations. There's a cannabis violation in my household on the reg. Like, it's just unbelievable to think about how many people had been thrown in prison over this, over pot. But let me continue with that graphic. Still, only a small number of those people actually ended up in prison, and that's important to keep in mind as well. Also, usually there's like a plea deal, so if someone was thrown in prison for what appeared to just be simple marijuana possession, typically they pled a more serious offense down to simple possession. But nonetheless, we all know that people have been thrown in prison in the past for marijuana possession and marijuana-related crimes, and she was one of the prosecutors who carried, those convictions out. Then fast forward to 2018, when she co-sponsored legislation with Senator Cory Booker to legalize marijuana federally. So maybe she didn't want to talk about her evolution. Maybe she didn't want to explain where that evolution came from, but she did talk about marijuana on another podcast appearance. Here's what she said on the All the Smoke podcast. So I'm curious what you think, John, because for me, this issue is such a layup, and I don't know why someone like Kamala Harris can't just say, look, this is where the country used to be, and I regret that was the case. I have grown, I have evolved as a person, I've made mistakes. Here's where I stand on the issue now. I think that it's admirable when people take ownership of, misguided decisions or actions they've taken in the past, but I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, it's why I find it very confusing. And I guess I'm inclined in this case to just take him at his interpretation of what the conversation was, but it's so confusing that it's hard to understand. So she turned down a couple weeks before the election an opportunity to come on, partly at least, because she didn't want to talk about an issue that she has the right position on now. I don't understand that at all. It would be so incredibly easy to say, it was my job at that point to uphold the law, and that's what I did. It's also my personal prerogative to seek to change it, which is what I will do. I will legalize it. What I did when it was my job was, yes, I put people in jail. I didn't personally like that, but that was the law. I would say there are other people that want to do far more than just uphold the law. Donald Trump repeatedly talks about giving the death penalty to people who deal drugs, which is significantly worse than putting them in jail. Why would that be so difficult for her to say? And theoretically, maybe you could win Joe Rogan over because he doesn't seem to be aware of Donald Trump's history of making comments about killing people for dealing drugs. He certainly didn't bring it up when he had Donald Trump on. I feel like that was a very manageable situation.
I agree. I totally agree with you on that. Democrats need to wisen up to the fact that it's a brand new era in political campaigning, and the old rules no longer apply. The old ways of campaigning and getting your message out aren't really as effective.
Kamala Harris has found herself in a unique political no man's land, rejected by both sides of the aisle for different reasons. Progressives see her as a chameleon, swinging between moderate policies and woke slogans like a broken GPS. Her past as a prosecutor, once touted as a sign of strength, has become an anchor she refuses to confront or release. On the right, she's viewed even more critically as cold, calculating, and lacking in personality. She's become the poster child for the over-engineered politician who repels people rather than connects with them. All gloss, no substance, more focused on optics than ideas. Incredibly, Harris has accomplished a rare political feat, uniting the country in mutual apathy. She doesn't energize her base. She doesn't win over the center. Instead, she floats in a fog of rehearsed smiles and calculated stillness. She perfectly embodies what people despise about modern politics.
It doesn't have to be Joe Rogan's podcast, but I think someone who's campaigning to be president of the United States should feel comfortable in their own skin and feel comfortable making a case for themselves off the cuff, without a prompter, without the need to demand editing after the conversation. Part of the reason why, this is according to Joe Rogan, you could choose to believe him or not, I think he's telling the truth. Part of the reason why Kamala Harris did not agree to an appearance on his podcast is because, well, first of all, they didn't want to do a 3-hour conversation. They wanted to do a 1-hour conversation. She didn't want to travel to Austin. She wanted him to travel to her in Washington, D.C. He doesn't do that for anyone, so he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. Obviously, there were certain topics that were off limits, and then they wanted the ability to call for edits after the conversation. He doesn't edit anything. We need strong, confident candidates who can make a case for themselves, and more importantly, people who are willing to own their past record and explain why they think differently today. It's okay to say that you've changed your mind. It's totally fine. I've been there. Most people have been there. The question is, do you deny changing your mind? Do you pretend like you've always been perfect? Or do you take ownership of mistakes you've made in the past? And I think the American people actually really like and appreciate when someone is willing to own up to their mistakes. So, look, it's too late for Kamala Harris. It's too late for this election, obviously. But I think that these are teachable moments that I hope the Democratic Party takes to heart moving forward when it comes.
Anna Kasparian is no longer holding back, and Kamala Harris is directly in her sights. Kasparian has had enough of Harris's disappearing act, accusing her of feeding the public canned sound bites and convenient amnesia at a time when genuine honesty is desperately needed. Her frustration is both personal and generational. Harris's refusal to examine her own record, especially in criminal justice, isn't a minor oversight. It's political suicide in an age where transparency is the price of entry. The public no longer punishes vulnerability. They crave it. Yet Harris clings to the Clinton-era mindset that control equals competence. Kasparian's condemnation goes beyond one individual. It targets an outdated political archetype, the consultant-coached, camera-ready politician who treats honesty as a weakness. But that world no longer exists. And if Harris hasn't realized that, her latest move may be her final miscalculation. So what do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. And if you don't want to miss out on the hottest celebrity news, make sure to subscribe to Daily Finder.